Good afternoon. I'm delighted to help kick off the International Women's Day signature event. This is the fourth year we've hosted this important event to recognize the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. The KPMG Network of Women and our Women of Risk community have partnered to bring you their best program yet. I was excited to hear about the theme for today's event, Choose to Challenge. This is all about speaking up and speaking out, something very important to us at KPMG. The theme aligns so closely with our firm's core values of integrity, courage, excellence, together, and for better. We all know there are moments when it takes true courage to speak up, especially if it's not the popular opinion, and that's not easy for everyone to do. We also know, though, in moments like this, when we give voice to our values, that speaking up can result in real, substantive change. That's why courage is fundamental to our culture at KPMG and why we are dedicated to creating an environment where people are encouraged to freely speak their minds without fear of retribution. I am personally committed to creating a supportive space where everyone's voice can be heard, where everyone feels comfortable sharing their ideas and choose to challenge is the status quo. To encourage a speak up culture, we are creating the conditions that welcome constructive challenge, where diverse perspectives are respected always, and where employees feel empowered to be honest and direct in a caring and helpful way. We know that a diverse, inclusive, and supportive working environment is an imperative for our people to thrive. In an organization as large as ours, change doesn't happen overnight, but through hard work and by joining events like this one and making it a priority, we can affect substantive change in our work environments and in our communities. And now I'll turn things over to Elena Richards, who will be moderating today's session. Elena, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor and a privilege to be with you this afternoon, and the Choose to Challenge theme for this year couldn't be more real. As we look to the year that we've all had, if we really tried to think about the messages and the videos, the theme could not have been better for us. And if you want to take a few minutes and look at all the social media posts and all of the energy that we've had, I just am really energized by all the videos that I just saw. So on your Twitter post and your LinkedIn, if you have the opportunity, I would encourage you all to just spend a little bit of time just thinking about all the things that we've accomplished this week. I would be remiss if I didn't think about just solidarity for women and what organizations are trying to accomplish. We're each and every day trying to strive for more. If you think about just in this last month, what the job market looks like and how many women have left, we can't, and I think Kamala Harris would have said it best, that we cannot survive. The economy is depending on our women. And so how each of us show up today, I welcome our women, our men, all that are part of this conversation to truly sit back for a great discussion. It makes me hopeful that this is truly an inclusive world that we are trying to put forth for all dimensions of diversity. It makes me incredibly hopeful when we think about just if we reflect on the year that we've had and what the world has told us together and bought in order to make sure that we're thinking about the world that we're trying to make for tomorrow. If we can't speak up and think about equality and equity, then we're really not going to accomplish the goals that we have. And so one of the things that is important when we think about that is just to keep in mind all of what has happened. And so as I think about tomorrow, Breonna Taylor's birthday, it's sort of some of the things that have happened as we look back at this world that we live in. If we think about just the arms that the globe has put around us in this pandemic as we're looking to get back to work, and the year that we've had. And so I encourage each of us to really spend some time pledging to move forward together. I am so excited about the opportunity to be with such great panelists, PJ and Pearl and all of my presenters today that are with me. I know that we are coming to you from our homes with a lot of life happening. And so as I say that, I have construction workers in my home. So real time, just before we got started, life is happening. So I want to make sure that you all know that we can pivot and adjust, because that's what we've been doing in this world of COVID throughout everything that we've been enduring together. So sorry for the background noise. I'm apologizing up front, but they weren't supposed to be here today, and they were supposed to be here on Tuesday, and unfortunately they're here. So I would love for us, as we begin this discussion, for you all to just join me in welcoming my panelists. And so I have Pearl that's with me, PJ, and David. I forgot, we just said in our roundup that we wouldn't forget you, David, our only man on the panel, that I want to bring them up on the screen. There are some tips that I need to share with you before we do that. If you have any questions, or if you're having any kind of technical difficulties, please text in your question, because we'll be able to provide you with some technical support. And if you need to ask a question, we have had a lot of questions submitted, and I think we're joined by close to 5,000 of our closest friends. So I really appreciate you all taking the time this afternoon to join us for this incredible discussion. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that you have the ability to help us think about as we look at International Women's Day is the world in which we live in. And as we are thinking about coming out of our homes, this is where I've spent the last 365 days. And coming to you on video through all this tremendous change, we have also seen an incredible opportunity to really forge together for what we're trying to do. And in all those ways that intersects, it's not just about our gender, but when we think about our race, when we think about all the other dimensions of diversity and how we show up, we must show up as ourselves, authentically as we are. We must ask for the things that we need. And if we see something that doesn't seem right, we have the ability to choose and to challenge. So our hope and the theme of today is really to do that with authenticity, with a level of vulnerability, because that's the only way we're going to get better. As Paul said, we are trying to get better. And so us as an organization, but all the communities of which we serve and want to move forward with, that is so important and critical to what we do. So thank you for the opportunity to moderate this wonderful panel. And so again, I'm going to bring up my co-panelist for this great discussion. I've had the privilege of spending some time with them earlier this week. And so Pearl, I welcome you. David, I welcome you. And PJ, I welcome you to this conversation. And to tee us up, I'd love for us to maybe introduce yourselves, share where you join us from, and tell us a little bit fun fact about yourself.
I guess I'll go first. It's trying to read the technology here with some potential delays. So my name is Pearl Pugh. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for the hematology business as part of Janssen Oncology, which is within Johnson & Johnson. And so I'm really excited to be here with you all today. A fun fact about me is that over the course of the past year, I have become a plant mom. And I used to be a total black thumb. Like I could not keep even like the smallest, plant alive. It was not a good situation. But I now am a proud plant mom of about 25 houseplants in our house that generally are thriving, although I'm trying to noodle on one plant that's having some watering issues. So that's my fun fact.
Thank you.
I can go next.
PJ, thank you.
So hi, as I look through the screen, good afternoon to everyone. My name is PJ Vaughn. I'm the General Manager of our Corp Audit Department in Chevron. I'm coming to you from California. And for a fun fact about me, I thought I'd give you a little glimpse into maybe a dimensions of diversity on my aspect, because when I go through and answering some of the questions, I think it'll have some relevance and set some context for you. So I grew up in rural Nevada, a very small town called Eureka, population 1,500. My graduating class was 16. I grew up on a farm, helping my dad farm. My parents divorced when I was 2. And I grew up with my dad. And so I kind of say he's a trailblazer because there weren't many single parents, especially men, raising their kids by themselves then. And growing up on the farm, he gave me a lot of responsibility as a young child. And, I was operating heavy equipment. I was making decisions. And it really didn't matter that I was a girl. And so he really installed a lot of confidence in me, starting as a young child. Thanks.
Thank you. Paul?
Great, and hi everyone.
Sorry, David.
No worries at all. Well, thank you, Elena. Thank you to KPMG, and a special thanks especially to Danielle Kicks for inviting me, and as I've told her, for trusting me on this panel, that I won't say anything I'm not supposed to. It's a pleasure to be here with the three of you. I feel like the ratio for a good panel is about right, 1 man, 3 women, so hopefully we can live up to that, and hopefully I don't break, or hopefully I can break the stereotype of the men trying to dominate the conversation. So you'll hold me accountable to that. Again, my name is David Chang. I'm a portfolio manager at Wellington Management Company, where I've spent the last 20 years. I'm calling in from my 4-year-old's bedroom, which is just outside of Boston. And my fun fact is actually very similar to PJ's, although a little bit different. So my last name is Chang. It's actually my mother's name. I took her name because she single-handedly raised me from before the day that I was born. She is my greatest role model to this day. She was an investment banker for many years. Also, she was in investment management, so the same industry as I find myself in. And for me, she's been a trailblazer in her industry as a Chinese woman in our industry. So that's the background on my name, and probably without her and her influence, I wouldn't be on this panel today.
Well, thank you, David, for sharing. And I think one of the things that I know we all are empathizing and feeling and understanding with all of our Asian colleagues, all of the xenophobia as we are starting to open up in the world of work and businesses, especially here where I sit in the tri-state area, that has been sort of the thing the last few weeks, months, year. And so what we try to make sure that we're also being really mindful of is the ways in which diversity intersect. And so I think it's important to honor that in the conversation too, and what are we doing to support all of our individuals that and how they show up. And so moms are very important. My mom, or at least my fun fact, is she's one of my biggest role models and fans and supporters. And in this time, moms still keep you really grounded in what you do. And so it doesn't matter how old you are. She asks me every night, what are you making for dinner? And so just the West Indian culture and parts of who we are is how we show up no matter what. And so moms are important, especially when we think about where we've all come. So why don't we get into our topic of conversation when we think about choosing to challenge? I'm going to ask each of you, if you can, tell me your moment or an example of when you've chosen to challenge. Why don't we start this question with PJ?
Yeah, thanks, Elena. I think the example that comes to mind for me is, I work for Chevron and I am in the finance function, and I had the opportunity to move overseas. And up until that time, both my husband and I were dual career. We have 2 children at the time. They were 4 and 6, and the opportunity came about that we could move to Angola. And just even with my family, my husband's family, they weren't so keen on that because moving to Angola, it's probably hard for the trailing spouse to also work as well. So that was meaning I was going to be the one working and my husband would be the one managing the household and managing the kids. And even right from the start, his family, they were a little more traditional and understanding the roles of the husband and the wife and, saying, well, what is your husband going to do? And he's not going to work and he's going to be managing the household. And I said, yes, but I will have the position. So I think right from the beginning, there was just trying to get with the family that viewpoint that, yeah, it's okay to have different roles and not that kind of stereotypical that the woman is the one that's rearing children and taking care of the household. But so we got over that. We moved to Angola and our children were 4, our 2 girls were 4 and 6. And going into that, as we got over there, it was a wonderful experience, and everybody that I worked with, they knew I was working and my husband was the one home. But when we go out in the community and in social environments, many folks that we talk to, and if my husband and I were together, they would, automatically assume that my husband was the one working and that I was the one that was home with the children. And so I think that, just moving overseas and going through that aspect, you learn to deal with a lot of stereotypes. And I guess, where I try to challenge is, you go into those situations, sometimes you don't know what you're going to expect. You do have some self-doubts, but I think it goes back to that when I was talking to you about my fun fact, that confidence and ability to step into different situations and really to perform and demonstrate that, you can be in those positions. And so that's just kind of been a lifelong learning for me. And we've learned so much in going through that. But, it does take stepping out of your comfort zone and being willing to put yourself in situations. And, you may not have all the answers. My husband and I didn't have all the answers when we were going from a dual career to me just working. And you just have to be constant at helping to people to understand that, yeah, it can be done. And it may not have been done, but there's always a time.
Thank you for that. Do we want to move to Pearl? And I would be remiss, Pearl, if I didn't acknowledge some of what is happening with J&J and that the help that I think many of us on this phone may be using and leveraging the vaccine and getting us back into the office where I can meet some of my KPMG and colleagues at some point. So I do want to acknowledge that and have you answer this question as well.
Sure. Thank you, Elena. And I'm really proud to work for J&J and that as a company, we're really contributing to this fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you. The example that I think of in terms of choosing to challenge in my career comes from earlier on in my career when I was my first brand team leader role in marketing. And at the time, I was actually quite young and early in my career and had just convinced my boss and earned the opportunity to really lead this small brand team without a tremendous amount of marketing experience behind me. And so I'm in this role, things are going great, and then I get pregnant. And at the time, there weren't really a lot of women in brand team leader roles, let alone in marketing. Marketing can oftentimes be quite demanding in terms of the hours that you put in and the travel. And so people started to ask me, just in casual conversation, how long was I going to be out on leave? Was I coming back? Was I going to stay in marketing? And, I really thought to myself, well, these are really silly questions. Of course I'm coming back. I planned to do so. I had a whole plan to come back after 3 months. And so I'd really, just confidently state and respond to those questions and said, I'm definitely coming back. And by the way, I have a great coverage plan for this interim period where I'm going to be out for a couple of months. But that I was totally committed to the business and to the team. And so, there shouldn't really be any question about me coming back. But that was the first time, I have to say, in my career when I truly realized and appreciated how men and women could be treated differently in the workplace with regards to expectations. And, sometimes this was grounded in conscious or unconscious biases. It goes back to the point that PJ was making around kind of societal expectations, oftentimes around the role that women play. And I was really happy to be kind of, somebody who was really challenging what at the time was, a little bit less commonplace by really, being vocal about it and role modeling.
Yeah, one of the things I used to tell my mom is stop asking what's for dinner. It's good that we're at least eating, right? So how do you think about that in the context? As long as we eat, it doesn't matter who cooks. That's sort of the message. David, I'm going to turn this over to you and tell us about your experiences with choosing to challenge.
Great. So Carl described an earlier moment where she chose to challenge. Mine is a little bit more recent. It goes back to 5 years ago. And there were three things that happened sort of back to back that really energized me to challenge the status quo. The first one is I work for a private partnership, and every December, partner classes are elected. And in December of 2015, we had 1 woman and 13 men who were elected to the partnership. And that was a moment to think about, basically half of the firm that are women, and thinking about the message that was contained in that memo that listed the partners for that year. A few months later, we had the first female partner of our firm who came to speak to a number of us. And she was one of 29 original partners and the only woman. And Dina highlighted that number, that 1 out of 14, and at the same time really made a statement that resonated with me. She said, when she was at the firm in the 80s and 90s, it felt like women were working twice as hard to be paid half as much. And going back to my mother, that reminded me very much about perhaps her experience and some of the biases and the inequities. And she said, well, I would have hoped that by now things would have changed significantly. And then the third thing that happened just after that, I was having a conversation with a colleague who was retiring, and I asked him, what are the biggest risks for our firm? And he said very clearly that we don't manage to motivate the next generation of talent. And so putting the three together, it was really a call to find a way to change some of that path in terms of the representation of women when it comes to our partnership, when it comes to our investor base. And I decided to send an email to 40 male partners. And this was on a Friday. It took me until the end of the day to have the courage to send it, I guess. So it was about 4 o'clock when I sent it. And by 6 o'clock, 20 of them had responded. And had responded really to a call to action of how could we do a better job to recruit, to develop, to retain, and to promote talent. And as I've learned over the last 5 years since I came out, it's really thinking about it in the reverse order of that when it comes to the importance. The most important is how can we advance our talent. The least important or the easiest is how do we recruit talent. But that was a moment that started an effort at the firm called Upstanders, and one for which I'm here on the panel with you today.
I appreciate your courage. Obviously, David, what were some of the reactions? I'm going to go a little deep into that question, or just the reception of some of those partners, the reactions. Would you mind sharing?
What was really incredible is I think there was sort of this dormant desire to do something, but there was no platform for it at the firm. And as I think about all of the efforts towards diversity and inclusion at any firm, you're the head of diversity at KPMG, there's a diversity committee at Wellington, we have HR that's very committed to it, but the main missing ingredient, in my opinion, was what is the involvement of the male leadership, majority in the leadership of the firm, and what can we do? And so the response was very positive, overwhelmingly positive. There were a lot of really great ideas. There were also, I'm proudest, hopefully he will forgive me for saying this, but I'm proudest of the fact that the head of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee today is someone who at the time questioned whether there was any bias in our promotion process, and today is fighting against that bias. So I think that's a very positive outcome. But the reception, what I have found, and if there's one thing that I can catalyze and encourage people who are listening to this call is you don't need a message from the top saying we need to do something about diversity. This can be grassroots, and we all have the power to influence our colleagues to make change.
I totally appreciate that. And we know that we all have a voice in our organizations and have to come from a place where we feel the most comfortable to raise those. And so I do encourage, right, our men in this conversation, our women in this conversation, and those in those specific roles, whether it be diversity, HR. I want to go back to you, PJ, for a second, if you don't mind. How did you overcome some of the obstacles, right? You've moved quite a few times, if I remember from our conversation, with respect to different roles. And I think mobility is a conversation that comes up in many organizations, and whether or not people will either want to change roles, change countries. And how did that play out for you in your career path?
I think the mobility and how I did that, I think that really played an impact. And I think back, I over the 29 years at Chevron, I've had 17 positions and I've had probably 28 managers. I was tallying it up, and I think the way I've gotten those opportunities is, a lot of times I do go into places where it's more male dominated. I mean, when I went into Angola, it was predominantly at the management level, it was all male. And I was thinking, well, how did I really kind of overcome that? Or I think when I go in, I have this perspective, and I go in and I really invest the time in the role, and I learn the business. I learn, my inputs, outputs, and I really engage with the stakeholders. And it gets back to me growing up. My dad always taught me, give 110% and leave something better than the way you found it. And so that's really where I pour my time into my work. And I think that's where the relationships come. And then people see, then if I'm delivering the results and getting and adding value, it really helps to, open those doorways, because then people know already that, okay, she's delivering. And then that's really when I'm able to leverage and build those relationships and ask a lot of questions. I seek out mentors. And I guess I somehow just, sometimes you may notice it that you're the only female, but I just pressure on, because I've just been in those situations, and somehow I know it's easy to say, but I just don't let that bother me. And if I'm demonstrating with results, a lot of times I think that helps to accomplish what you're wanting to accomplish, and push your way into key areas and really demonstrate that you're adding value and you need to be there.
I appreciate that. And so, yeah, I think credentials are important. And when we think about having those tough conversations, you mentioned mentors, and sometimes for women, we're looking for mentors that look like us. And so we all can probably give examples of mentors having to come in all shapes and sizes, all hues, right? Not necessarily always looking like ourselves. And that comes with a level of trust and vulnerability. A mentor of mine once shared, you have to come and share some of who you are, and how did you, maybe for any of you, give an example of how that may have played out, where you had to trust the person more so when the relationship may not have been there. whether it be, I think, PJ, when you talked about even just exploring the tour, I remember when we spoke a little bit about that, and how did you play that out for yourself?
Exploring that, I didn't hear the tour.
The tour when you went on the assignment for Angola, and you also went somewhere else, I think, right? For Brazil?
Yeah, I did. We've had two stints. We had a stint in Angola for 3 years, and then I also worked in Argentina. And from a mentor perspective, I rely heavily on mentors, and I think that's part of what gets me some of the opportunities that I've had. And it's really, I go back to, from a mentor perspective, I think it starts when I first started with the company. And, I didn't always see a lot of folks that look like me, that Black managers, but I had two very influential senior African American managers that really pulled me aside early on, shortly after joining the company. And they were both male, and they really, and okay, I also came, as I told you, my background. My dad, he graduated from high school. He didn't go to college, and he definitely didn't work in corporate America. So I didn't have anybody when I started working with Chevron, a family member that I could go back to and say, hey, what are things I should be thinking about? How should I approach this? I want to be successful. So I didn't have that kind of structure in my immediate family at all. But I was so thankful when I had these two African American managers pull me aside, and I guess they were my mentors, my sponsors, and they helped me to understand, like, PJ, these are the things you need to think about. This is how you should approach this. These are the things you should be doing. This is who you should be talking to. They also give me a lot of feedback too, probably things I didn't want to hear at the time. You're young, you think you know everything. But I think back to that point of them being willing to share that knowledge and taking the time to do it. I didn't ask them to do it. And it goes to the inclusion piece that we talk about today. And that simple aspect that they did made me feel so included. And when a person feels included, you feel like, okay, I can go do that. It gives you that confidence. And so that kind of, noting from that mentor perspective, I've had that guidance and advice and mentors and sponsors over the course of my career, which, as when I went to Argentina, and I think we all do this, we have these self-doubts about, wow, can I really go into this position? Can I do this? I haven't done it before. When I went to Argentina, I was going into a position managing our finance shared service organization, and it's about 380 people at the time. And up until that time, I had managed, probably 30, maybe max. And when the controller came to me and said, PJ, we have this opportunity. Are you still mobile? Would you consider it? And I said, yeah, that would be great. But then the thing in the back, that voice in the back of your head is saying, well, PJ, you've never managed a group that large. And so I thought about it. I went back to him. I said, okay, just being fully transparent, I've not managed a group that large before. And we've seen what you've done. We know what you can do. We have full confidence in that. And so that was that whole aspect of, those mentors and knowing that you have somebody to talk to that gives you that confidence, because then the finance leadership team says, we know what you can do. You are going to do fine in that role. But the mentor and the sponsorship has helped me tremendously, and it's helped to, I guess, quiet those doubts, I think, that I have sometimes.
And we've all had those doubts in our head. So go ahead, Pearl.
I was just going to say, if I could build upon what PJ is saying about the importance of mentorships and sponsorships, and in all shapes, sizes, and forms. I think when you tend to work in industries perhaps that are a little more male dominated, oftentimes those advocates, those mentors, those sponsors are men. And so I think it's important not only to obviously perform well. So if you have aspirations of progressing in your career, I think that is, obviously very critical. But it's these relationships where people are in the room making decisions. They're discussing candidates for promotion or certain types of career moves or succession pipeline planning. it's really important to kind of get into that conversation. And how you get into that conversation indirectly is through networks, mentorships, sponsorships, advocates. And I think, oftentimes women underestimate the power of that, and perhaps see it as something that is either not worth their time, or they don't want to be artificial in building those networks. But at the end of the day, it's really about building relationships, and building relationships beyond kind of the scope of maybe your day job responsibilities, so that people get to know you as an individual, what your interests are, what your talents are, what your experiences are. So I just want to, echo what PJ said about the importance of having those male mentors and sponsors. And oftentimes it's those, mentor sponsors, regardless of what background, gender, race, or ethnicity you have, that do give you that confidence, that push you a little bit more. There's a lot of research to show that, women tend to apply for a job when they meet 100% of the criteria, whereas men oftentimes apply after meeting about 60% of the criteria. So the example that PJ illustrated is one which is very commonplace, where you have that little kind of maybe doubt going on in the back of your head, and it's oftentimes this group of this network of sponsors, advocates, mentors who will really kind of encourage you, give you that confidence, push you to a space where perhaps you'll have greater growth, but also a little bit of greater discomfort.
Sorry. David, do you want to share anything?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've ever applied for a job where I've been more than 20% qualified for it. So it's I certainly fit that stereotype. PJ, you started by describing mentors and advocates, and I think those two are extremely important. There's an unconscious, I don't know if it's an unconscious bias, but an unconscious happening that tends to occur where, the likes tend to gravitate towards mentoring and sponsoring likes. And when you're in a male-dominated environment, males tend to sponsor and advocate and mentor other males more easily. It's just, I think, human nature, just to blame it on that. So I think it's really important to be very conscientious about how we can apply a greater role for dedicated sponsorship, and I think the two are easily confused or mistaken for each other. But sponsorship to me is so much more important than mentorship, because it really is about finding someone who's willing to be your champion when you're not in the room, when you're in discussion for a promotion or for a stretch assignment, and so again, I think having that dedicated effort towards sponsorship and advocacy is so key.
Yeah, and sometimes that means that you're going to have a sponsor that's going to do things that you may not necessarily always hear about. And they may be doing things for you behind the scene. It could just be something like, oh, did you see what PJ or Pearl, wrote about this or shared about whatever it is. And so sometimes our sponsors are those that are just supporting the work that you've done and behind the scenes giving some level of encouragement, and that takes some time. So at the core of that all is how we build relationships, and in order to do that, a level of trust, right? Because for any one of the roles that we are all in, that took taking some trust in the person that helped us get there. And so I think if there's any message that we can help impart on all of us that are in this conversation and what we want to do for women who need to be in the workplace, we could do more of that. And so super helpful for taking us through that. Now, I know I want to be really mindful of time, and we're getting some really great questions, but we had some that were submitted in advance. So if we're comfortable, I am going to read some of these. So what's been sort of the hardest hurdle that some of you have had to overcome in the workplace? So when it comes to being passionate about diversity and inclusion, David, why are you so passionate about diversity and inclusion is the question that came in for you.
I think it goes back to what my retiring colleague was saying. It's motivation, right? working for an asset management firm, we have one asset. It walks out the door, not these days, I guess it goes back to the bedroom and it comes back into the office at home every day, but it's people, right? And if we don't motivate people, how can we get the best when it comes to performance? So there really is something about having a fair environment that I think is very motivating. And I saw what I thought was somewhat of an unfair environment with my mother. I was fortunate that, by being essentially, the 16-year-old, 17-year-old at the dinner table with her, coming back from work, she would often describe her experience. So I got to hear it sort of firsthand. And it felt unfair at times. And so I think that really has galvanized, sort of my passion for striving for greater fairness through equity. As simple as that. And again, as I said earlier, I know I'm not the only one. Everyone sort of has that passion. It could be driven by their mother. It could be driven by their spouse, their children, their daughters. And so what I found with this Upstanders effort at Wellington is this group of originally 20 male partners grew to what is today about 250 male and women partners and managing directors who really are committed to trying to bring greater diversity, equity, and I guess in all caps, inclusion at the firm.
Pearl, let me ask you a question about just when you think about, you said sponsorship is important for all of us. When you look back to your career and maybe some of the folks that are looking up to you, was there any kind of piece of advice as far as the trust aspect that you had to give feedback or help someone maybe build upon that in your relationships? I remember when we talked, you talked about some of the staff that you were working with.
Yeah, I think to really build those kind of, you talked about trust and relationships. I think need a little bit of a level of vulnerability as well. And I don't want people to think and mistake kind of vulnerability for weakness, right? I think being vulnerable is being human. And so I think really, building kind of depth of relationship to really have that genuine curiosity about understanding somebody else, whether they are a mentee or a mentor, and maybe, trying to find some common grounds and going in with an open mind about learning. I mean, we can learn from every relationship. So I've certainly learned from the mentors in my career, and I've learned from mentees as well. And I think there's something to be gained for every relationship if you really go into it with an open mind, with genuine curiosity, with a level of vulnerability, to appreciate that, we're all the product of our diverse life experiences, and everybody brings something to the table. And if you kind of approach it with that type of attitude, I think it will open your mind to very rich mentoring conversations in either direction that will help to hopefully benefit you in your career. So that's what I found. But sometimes I think when you're on the mentee side and you're a little earlier on in your career, sometimes that can be a little uncomfortable and maybe intimidating. You want to make sure that you are always coming across as very polished and professional if you're meeting with senior folks, and of course in formal presentations that's important. Make sure you're prepared. But I think on a one-on-one level, you really should feel a little bit more comfortable to let your guard down a little bit, right? Let your mentor know who you are, what you're about. I think that really is what leads to very strong and really productive relationships at the end of the day.
I think for me, if I look back to my career, and the reason I wanted to hone in on this question is if we all show up in our authentic way, that sometimes will that have a negative impact, or will someone still consider you for opportunities? And I think the more you can share about yourself, the more you're willing to give. And they call it a notion of FCT, familiarity, comfort, and trust. And if we have superficial conversations, and we can all get through that, we do that for each and every conversation for work. But the more you can sort of build that familiarity, and even now it's harder to do when we're over these screens each and every day. So I don't want to not take into consideration that we're doing that even more tenfold in the current world or over the course of the last few weeks and months and year, right? 365 days. And how we do that is going to be really critical. But that does require a little bit of trust and trust in the organizations that we work for and the people that we're extending our bread with, or lunch or whatever virtually when we need to. But it often becomes even harder to do because we are in these environments. So I know for sure that for 4 months I've been here. And so my only way of getting to know anyone has been over these phones and through video. And so that I encourage people to spend the time and get to know and build a little bit of that vulnerability. And, even if it's something personal, you'd be surprised if we don't show up in our own authentic way. How can someone help or support you in growing into whatever you're looking to accomplish? So for me, over the course of my career, it could have been when I got a divorce. And so, typically you don't necessarily want to share what's happening at home, but for people to really appreciate what was happening for me, I had to be vulnerable and share a little bit more with my colleagues. And so I was amazed by the level of support from my male colleagues, probably more so than my women colleagues, because they understood and sort of wanted to help me. And so it's something that I remember based on what you guys were sharing that was really real, and it helps so much because you don't always appreciate how much people are willing to help us if we just put ourselves out there a little bit more. Let's see. I know that I wanted to maybe go into a little bit around the questions that we have. Educational responsibility. What are some of the favorite educational resources that you all are doing in this COVID moment to educate yourselves and really think about resources? So when we are looking to upskill ourselves and think about diversity and inclusion, we're all learning a lot about diversity and inclusion and over the course of the last year. So I'm just trying to maybe bring it to the moment where everyone is doing more. What are you doing specifically around diversity and inclusion upskilling?
Go ahead, Pearl.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, I feel really fortunate because J&J has had a longstanding commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and we've made a significant, actually, commitment to particularly being one of the world's largest healthcare companies. A kind of what we call the race to health equity. And what we've known for a long time, but what we're trying to do and bring more to light are the racial disparities with regards to healthcare access, participation in clinical trials, and healthcare outcomes. And so as part of this effort, in addition to our ongoing commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, we've provided our employees with a lot of resources, not only resources for their own reading and education, but also resources around really better understanding, like speaker series, et cetera, to really better understand how diversity and inclusion impacts us in every aspect of our life, as well as the business that we're in. In addition to participating in a lot of those educational sessions, which for me are also very much a learning experience. I've been doing a lot of reading on the side as well to really expand my knowledge and understanding, particularly of the Black experience. It's interesting because I grew up, we've spoken a lot about our diverse backgrounds. I grew up as a first generation, so my parents immigrated to the U.S. for graduate school, and I was born and raised here. And I came up kind of through the U.S. schooling system. My husband is British, and so we're kind of a multicultural family. And then my kids are mixed, so they're half and half. They're half Caucasian and half Asian. So we're a big melting pot in our house. And my dogs are also a hybrid, by the way. I have two golden doodles, so it's kind of a fun household. But anyway, I think with this backdrop, I have always thought of myself as being very kind of open and educated to lots of different cultures, having traveled a lot internationally. But I truly, and I have a lot of African American and Black friends as well, but I truly didn't totally really ever have those kind of more deeper conversations with them about their experience. And I didn't really learn as much about kind of, the overall experience other than what they teach in school. And so I've made a concerted effort to do more reading, to have deeper conversations with some of my friends about what kind of experiences and hardships and challenges they faced while growing up. And I think that's really helped me to really, open my mind as well, and in a continuous learning environment, and really appreciate and help to maybe be a better ally for a lot of my friends and colleagues.
I appreciate that, Pearl. PJ?
Yeah, I was just going to say, excuse me, from a Chevron perspective, very focused on diversity and inclusion. And the thing that resonated with me is we're having a lot of discussion. And, I've been with the company for 29 years. Would I have had that discussion when I started 29 years ago? No. But I think the thing that makes it different, and we've been on this for a few years now, but when you see top leaders from our CEO on down having discussions and being willing, you've talked about being vulnerable, being willing to make yourself vulnerable, being willing to have the discussion. I think that has been the most impactful. I try to read a lot, but I guess I'm more of a engager and wanting to dialogue. And so I would just say there's been a lot of dialogue, a lot of engagement. 3 years ago, the manager in our group, we went through an inclusive leader discussion, and that was as a leadership team. And we spent 2 years. I mean, it was, we're meeting every month and really having good, honest, and vulnerable conversations about how we viewed being inclusive and what that meant. And, kind of putting yourself out there, Elena, to your point about, you have to make yourself vulnerable. We've also recently, 2 years ago, we brought in from the Catalyst organization. It's called MARC. It's Men Advocating Real Change. And it started out as groups of women just having discussions about challenges they face, and then also men coming into that discussion. And, you start out with single gender discussions, and then we brought, then there was more demand of like, well, no, we want to have combined gender discussions and really be able to talk about some of these issues and challenges that we're facing. And each could share what perspective they had, or gosh, I didn't even realize that was how you felt, or that was a challenge. And so we've had those for 2 years, over 2 years now. And now it's more of an Elevate program, which is kind of taking that discussion to a different level. So I think there's kind of multiple fronts, and then also leveraging a lot from our employee networks, or maybe affinity groups that you would refer to. But, I think that has been a very good source for understanding perspectives, whether it's our Latinx group or our Black employee network or women's network or disabled network, whatever it may be. But I think the prominence and the leveraging of knowledge and perspective that those networks bring to the greater good, and having those conversations, I think that has been very impactful. So I think from my perspective, I kind of engaged across a multitude of respect. I was in the MARC program. I haven't gotten into Elevate just yet, but lots of engagement, lots of dialogue. And I think that's where it starts. People have to be willing to talk about things. You have to be willing to feel uncomfortable. And it's only through dialogue and discussion that I think you make progress. Because to me, when you dialogue with someone and you have a discussion, you begin to understand. And if you begin to understand where that person's coming from, you develop empathy. And once you have empathy, I think that really opens the door for being inclusive.
So one of the things, I mean, David, I want you to have the opportunity to answer as well, if you'd like.
I'll take maybe at most a minute, and I'll borrow a little bit from what Pearl and PJ were just talking about, because I think actually it's interesting within Wellington, it's been actually quite consistent. So again, one of the reasons I'm very proud of working at Wellington is a lot of efforts come from the bottom up. They're not necessarily imposed from the top down. And last summer, with the incredibly sad events, a group started a Becoming Allies effort. And I think they did a really wonderful job of making it grassroots, but also really taking it upon themselves to educate themselves, as opposed to leaning really heavily on our Black colleagues to educate us when our Black colleagues were already going through so much at the time. And so that group, Becoming Allies within Wellington, went from what was probably an idea to now 500 people who are really educating ourselves and preparing ourselves to have courageous conversations. And then the second thing, I'm actually like you, PJ, I tend to learn best by listening to others and hearing what others have to say rather than reading books. That's my bias. And we had one of the members of our Women's Business Alliance come and present the results of a survey that was taken, and really listening to Erica last fall really helped us understand better some of the challenges that women are still facing within our firm around self-confidence, around how to navigate the firm, even around compensation, around the idea of feeling underutilized at times, that they have skills that they would like to deploy more. And to me, I know I'm taking more than a minute here, but the notion of being able to hear directly from them what the challenges that they face is really, again, coming back to this choosing to challenge, a reason to have a call to action.
I think the call to action is, go ahead, Pearl. I think you want to say something.
Just one more thing to build upon what David and PJ were saying, to underscore the importance, if you really want to learn more, of getting involved with these employee resource groups, or I guess in some companies call affinity groups. And we also at J&J have numerous employee resource groups, and I've really tried to get involved and participate in and listen in and attend some of the events of a variety of groups that I perhaps wouldn't have naturally done, just to again learn more. So they are a great opportunity. Lots of companies have these, and I would encourage folks to really get involved and even just attend these events just to learn more about the different groups that are out there. I think they're very informative.
Yeah, I feel that, in this moment, we have a lot more opportunity. The BRGs, we call them our business resource groups at KPMG, and the amount of people that want to participate, it does provide an opportunity for us to be a member, learner, supporter, ally. And that gives you a platform to hear more about what the community is doing and how you can be a part of that. So definitely a great resource. I go back to your comments around empathy and understanding. And I'd love for us, if we can, as a collective, if we choose to, how do we get the word courageous out of the conversations, right? Instead of waiting for episodes and all of what's been happening, I'd love, in my role as a diversity leader, if we could get to more organizations having conversations across difference. And that's the challenge before us in ways that can hopefully empower change, the change that we're all trying to get to. I know I'm being really mindful of time, and maybe I'll get each of you to give your themes or what you would like because I got a very specific question for David. So I do want to ask this question. What advice would you give to men as allies that want to show up in a different way? What would you say?
For me to start?
Please.
I would take ownership. Don't wait for someone else to tell you to get something started. When we began Upstanders at this point 5 years ago, it really was a collective call to action, and again a grassroots one. And I've talked about Upstanders with peers across the financial industry, and I feel like there is that same desire to effect change. And you've already said it many times throughout it. It's about listening to the stories, about making ourselves vulnerable, but mostly to listen. I had complete misconceptions. I thought, what we need to really tackle first and foremost is recruiting. And then we need to bring in childcare. And then we need to do a better job with maternity leave. And no, very quickly I realized, well, actually, it has nothing to do with that. It's all about having a mindset. It's about how do we come across with the small and the big decisions that we're making every day. How do we account for diversity in that? Whether it's a small action around a meeting where a woman says something, and then 5 minutes later the man says the exact same thing, and it's like, oh, Joe, great comment, and it's like, no, calling it out. Well, Jane actually said that 5 minutes ago. But also the big decisions when it comes to promotion, when it comes to stretch opportunities, to really have that broad mindset. And maybe the last thing I'll say is, we often rely very much on experience when it comes to bringing someone into a firm or assigning someone a stretch assignment. Let's not lean too much on experience. Let's lean more on their talent and their potential. And I think I'm always pleasantly surprised when we do that, just how much the person is willing to step up.
Appreciate that. PJ, do you want to give any advice? Yeah.
I guess listening to it's probably similar to what the previous comments, but I guess I would just say is, and it's probably more for folks that maybe are in a manager position, but really think about where you were once starting out within the company. And, it is about listening and don't wait to take action, but make a real conscious effort to pay it forward. I mean, reach out and help someone else along. That may come in the form of mentoring. That may come in the form of offering advice. I think back, you're bringing new folks in. I think about those 2 African-American managers that pulled me aside when I was relatively new with the company just to give me some advice, guidance. And, it is about, David, about how do you retain people? Because you want women in the company to feel like they are part of the organization. And that means making an inclusive environment. And so, I mean, that act where when those folks pulled me aside and helped me, and I knew I had somebody I could go to and that they understood what I was going through, that made me feel included. And I think at the end of the day, everybody wants to feel included. They want to be in an inclusive environment where they can bring their whole self to work each and every day. And you do that by knowing that people understand the challenges that you're going through. They understand where you're coming from, that you can talk about it, that it's not some voodoo thing that, we just don't talk about. So I guess my call is really to those folks that are in influencing positions and management positions. Sometimes the smallest thing that you can do that you may think is small will have a big impact. And the more of those we all do will help move us along. So I guess I'm kind of with David, like, just don't wait to act, and really try to pay it forward and be intentional And it's not, sometimes you think it feels like solving world hunger, but it just takes one small step and looking at who you're helping and trying to understand and learn and grow.
Thank you for that. Pearl?
I guess, generally similar themes, but maybe something a little bit different is just, really encouraging women and your female colleagues to find and grow their voice. And I think, if you fostered an inclusive environment, I think that's a lot easier. So probably fostering that inclusive environment is really first and foremost. But what I've observed over the years are, there's a lot of really talented females there, but they're not necessarily self-promoting. They may not be the most vocal, but they have a lot of learning agility. So to David's earlier point, perhaps it's not just, depth of experience. They've demonstrated learning agility across a variety of different roles. And you see the projectability or the potential in them. But yet, they're not the ones out there saying, hey, I want to be like CEO, or I want to, do this, or I want to do that. And so really helping them to kind of, find their voice, grow their voice, and speak their voice, and women that you see potential in, I think will go a long way and will make a huge impact on the lives and careers of a lot of females. It's just one of those things, to the theme that PJ pointed out around paying it forward. I think that's one where we could do a little bit more, and it takes observation, right? It takes listening and it takes observation to kind of see that, but oftentimes they get kind of overlooked. But if you can help them to cultivate that voice, I think there's so much more opportunity.
So if you had one piece of advice that you'd give to your younger self, what would it be? Right? One of the things that we've asked, like, would there be anything that you would have told your younger self for the future generation?
I have one.
Please.
My point at my younger self, I think when I was working in groups, I networked really well with my immediate group I was working with, and any stakeholders that my position naturally connected me with. But probably what I didn't do as well when I was younger is broadening that sphere of my network, opening the aperture. And so I think if I could go back and tell myself what to do over again, I would have been more aggressive on networking outside of my position sphere.
Thank you for that. David? For Pearl?
Be a source of the solution.
Okay.
Being a part of the solution, I think it's very easy often to identify the challenges, the things that we feel are unfair. And it's easy to criticize those people who may have some power to do something about it. But being a part of the solution, I think, can go a very long way. And I'm almost saying this, I'm taking the opportunity, maybe to the extent that there are young people at Wellington today who are listening, to empower them, to make them feel empowered to evoke change. Because I think it's very easy to believe that, for instance, the millennials generation and the next generations after that have it figured out when it comes to gender biases, gender diversity, but I don't think they do. I think the unconscious biases and the pressures of our industry have a way to perpetuate some of the same things from happening time and time again. So I think that it really takes everyone's commitments to making a difference. And so if I were back 20 years ago starting at Wellington, I would engage myself to really learn about unconscious bias, to really learn about the experiences of my colleagues who have had a different experience or a different background than my own, and to try to make sure that I'm not part of that problem, but a part of the solution going forward.
Thank you for that. Pearl? Anything you would tell your younger self?
Yeah, I would say get out of your comfort zone, like way out. Similar to PJ, I've worked in a variety of different countries and functions and therapeutic areas and roles in my career. But I think there were times in my career where I could have stretched myself more by moving into a job that was much more out of my comfort zone. And I think your biggest growth opportunities come from those moments when you are like really like, holy cow, like this is giving me agita, right? This situation. But, when you come out the other end of it, it gives you a lot of confidence that you can handle more, you can handle different. And, you realize that you're so much more capable than perhaps you give yourself credit for. I will say I know a lot of people, men and women included, but it tends to skew a little bit more women, maybe undersell themselves. They're really phenomenal, but there's still this kind of, they're their harshest critics. And so I think when you go way out of your comfort zone, and I know this, nobody likes to be out of their comfort zone, but like from a career perspective, I think if you go way out of your comfort zone, you will probably grow the most, and you'll be surprised and proud at the end of the day after you've gone through that experience at what you can achieve and what the future possibilities are.
Thank you for that. And I would have to agree with each and every one of your comments, especially after the year that we've had and what we could do to move ourselves forward and the tremendous opportunity we could to support our women, and our men in these conversations. And so I feel my parting comment and thoughts and words of wisdom are, how do we trust a little bit more? How do we try to engage a little bit closer and give each other the benefit of the doubt, because we're not going to always get it right. We're going to make some mistakes, and hopefully that will help us get closer, because people's intentions sometimes are not necessarily met with how it actually lands. I may not say all the right things, but if I trust that you're trying to do the right thing and you're trying to give me advice or help me through, I think that is hopefully where we could do a lot more. And so this has been a fantastic conversation. I so enjoyed over the time getting to know each and every one of you. And we, as a community of, I think, 5,000 in our homes today, people are probably in from here to up, all dressed up and wanted to join us for this conversation, but appreciating that people are managing families, they're managing elder care, they're managing so many different things. And how we show up, we need all of our women for us to be successful as we try to move forward in the economy, the world at large. And so to end this wonderful week of International Women's Day, I can't begin to thank you for being here with us and spending the time, sharing your stories, your wisdom, knowing that you have made yourselves vulnerable in what you've done, but also in what you're doing to lead. So thank you so much for all that you continue to do with your organizations. I know I'm going to turn it over to Tracy Bernard, who's going to take us to the next part of the session. So thank you for letting me get to know each and every one of you.
Thank you so much, Elena. Thank you for moderating this fantastic panel. Thank you, David, PJ, and Pearl. It was just absolutely fantastic to hear your stories about having the courage to challenge, to stand up for yourselves and for others. I'm so honored to be a part of today's event. I mean, as Paul mentioned earlier, this is our 4th year we've hosted our signature International Women's Day event. And I may be biased. I think Paul was a little biased too, but I think this one was our best one yet. Hosting and sponsoring these types of events is a wonderful opportunity to bring women and our male allies together to help accelerate gender parity. One area that I know women, including myself, and I think we even talked about it a little through the panel discussion, struggle with is really around this concept of imposter syndrome. And I would say that term imposter syndrome really resonates with me, and I'm sure many of you. I actually remember the first time I heard about it, and I felt this sense of relief that I'm not alone. I'm not the only one out there that has these moments of self-doubt. I'm not the only one that has that little voice in her head asking, do I really belong? Can I do this? And I know we've all gotten advice ever since we were probably very little till today to never doubt yourself. But you know what? It is absolutely normal. I think it may even be ingrained in our DNA. I remember when I was first growing up in the firm, I think very similar to the story David shared very early on, it wasn't uncommon for me to be the only woman in the room, the only woman at the table. And so you can only imagine the imposter syndrome I often had back then. I had to find these small little ways to help build up my confidence in those settings, to showcase to others, and let's be honest, to convince myself why I belong. But I have to admit that there were times that I thought any day now someone was going to turn to me and basically say, the jig is up. Now, I'll share with you a story of when I was that younger self in my career and having one of those major moments of self-doubt. I actually turned to a colleague, a male colleague, and asked him if he ever felt that way. And he looked me straight in the eye and said, nope, never. Wow. At the time, I thought, oh my God, it's just me. I also thought, couldn't you just lie to me, make me feel better, make me feel not so alone? Which is why I think when I heard that term and first started to read about imposter syndrome, I did feel that relief, that I'm not alone. I'd say the good thing is that we've come a long way since then. People are more comfortable talking about it, sharing their experiences and feelings. We heard about it today through the panel. But you know what? This journey isn't over. We still have so much more to do. And I'll admit, even to this day, every once in a while, those doubts of my abilities creep in from time to time. But I believe that it doesn't make me weak. At least that's what I tell myself. It makes me stronger. It gives me the ability to take that step back and really think about my actions in a more thoughtful and strategic way. I'd say it also drives my passion to support those around me, as I know I'm not the only one that feels this way. Having someone to lean on for advice goes a long way. We've talked quite a bit about mentors and sponsors today, and I often tell people how critical having those mentors and sponsors have been for me, and I encourage everyone to reach out, to find mentors, to find sponsors, to reach out if you need help or just need someone to listen to you. I also urge you to lift up the next generation of leaders. Pay it forward, as we've talked about as well, leaving that lasting impression as many of my past mentors and sponsors have left on me. As the theme of International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge, I want to encourage all of you to constantly challenge yourself, challenge one another. With challenge, there will be change. I want to thank you all again for taking the time to join us today for this very important discussion. I hope you leave as inspired and as motivated as I am, and that you continue these conversations. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't make a little plug for the Women of Risk community. Our Women of Risk community is one of the ways you can stay connected, engaged in these types of topics. Please join our group on LinkedIn to stay updated on future events. And please post and share your thoughts and ideas using our hashtag so we can all follow along. We have some great virtual events in the works, and hopefully someday soon, in the not too distant future, we'll have some in-person events. Before you sign off, just as a reminder, we're going to ask you to take a quick survey. So please take that time to fill out the survey. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.